Good day, guys, and welcome back to our Kart Class Podcast. Today's episode is going to be all about why is my kart sliding? Now, I get this question a lot, whether it's through messages or on social media, about from parents asking, why is my kid sliding around the track? And now, even when I'm watching kids driving, you can see some newcomers that are just out of control. And obviously, it's not a bad thing to find your limits, to push the boundaries, to see what's possible around corners. But also, we need to understand why we're sliding around the corners so that once we find those breaking points and so on, we actually get an understanding on why we're out of control. If the parent or the kid's got no idea why their kid's out of control, then how are they going to learn? So this is what today's episode is going to be all about. Why is my kart sliding? From a driving point of view, which let's just start there. If our driving's not right, the setup is not going to be critical at all, because the first thing is, if your entry speed is too fast, then your kart will generally slide. If you're approaching the corner with more speed than the grip level that's actually possible for the track conditions, then even if the driver is smooth, the tyre's going to start to break traction. They're going to say, you know what, I can't hold that grip anymore. As you're turning in, the rear of the kart is going to tend to slide out and what's commonly known as oversteer. So what we want to do is, if our entry speed is too high, we want to obviously brake a little bit earlier or brake a little bit harder. Now, it works back to other podcasts when I've spoken about is, where are you accelerating? If you're accelerating after the midway point, then it's quite common that you're just entering too fast. So from a driver or a parent's point of view, if you're watching a driver, your son or daughter, or a kid that you're helping out, if they're constantly oversteering as they approach the middle of the corner and they're accelerating after the midway point, they're simply entering the corner way too fast. So if they're accelerating 2 karts too late, then let's try braking 2 karts earlier. Let's just reverse engineer it. That's the easiest way I can get the coaching method for a lot of the kids that I help on track. Let's start there. Once our speed is correct, now it's our entry line. Are we turning into the corner too early? This is very common for newcomers. It could also be that you're turning too late and you're missing the actual rubber line. But the most common tendency is that we're turning in too early. So all of a sudden, we've spoken about this before, we've got an 8-meter wide corner. We're turning in early. That's just shrinking. That track width is now getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And now once we get to the midway point around the corner, we're like, now we're starting to run out of road. We've got no more track width left. So what does the driver have to do to stay on the track? They have to turn the steering wheel more to stay on the track. Now, once they turn the steering wheel more, once the corner's actually finished, the front will eventually bite in. Once the front has actually turned in, the rear of the kart goes, I can't go from no steering to all of a sudden now we're having to turn it so aggressively to get around the corner. And the rear of the kart slides out again, and all of a sudden we're complaining because we've got no exit speed. If you're turning in too late, that's actually generally an easier fix, because it's like you're just going a little bit too wide, and now we're actually probably going past the rubber line and we're getting actual crap on our tires. We're getting that debris, that marbles. So that's an easier fix, because at least you've got a wide enough approach. So your corner's still relatively wide. It's just that you're picking up the marbles, and that's why your kart's probably sliding. So it's an easier fix if you're turning in too late. Let's try and exaggerate it that way first rather than narrow entries, because that's a lot harder to try and fix. Now, when it comes from a kart setup point of view, let's just look at the 2 main things as to why your kart might be sliding. The first one is the tyre pressures. Now, it can go both ways, that your tyre pressures can be too high or too low. But let's just look at the most common thing is that they're just too low. So when they're too low, it's taking them a longer time to reach a good tyre temperature. And if you're not in that tyre temperature window, then that's why the kart's sliding. It's breaking traction until they heat up. From a driving point of view, now for younger kids, they might not actually get a true understanding of this, but they might. If the kart gets easier and easier to drive, the more laps that you do, that's a sign that the tire pressures are too low. If it gets easy to drive, and then it feels really good, and then all of a sudden it starts to get harder to drive. It starts to slip and slide around the track, that's a sign that the tyres are too high in the pressures. So they were cold, they're getting faster, the kart's getting easier and easier and easier. It feels amazing. Now all of a sudden I'm doing more and more laps and now it's starting to get hard to drive again. Why is that? That's because the tyres are overheating. So they're trying to grip, they're too hot, and now that they're too hot, they're actually starting to lose that grip again. So let's try and find the perfect window for when your tyres are giving you the most amount of grip. Now on a practice day, probably the good thing is if the driver has an understanding on when they're starting to overheat, you can start to come into the pit lane, and once you're in the pit lane, check the hot pressure then, because you know that that's when they're starting to drop off. That's the pressure that's going to be too high. So when we're going out for our future sessions, don't set the pressures that high anymore. You know the window that you're trying to look for when the kart is in its optimal setup range. The next thing is, from like the most common things as to why a kart might be sliding, is just the rear track width is just too wide. Now for our senior karts, we've got our maximum track width as 1400. So we might find that if we decrease the rear track width by 5 mil per side, so now go to 1390, all of a sudden the rear of the kart has a little bit more stability, a bit more grip. It might be that you're starting at 1390 and you want to go in 2.5 mil per side, so you're at 1385. I would say that a senior kart, even a junior driver, the window is basically from 1375 in cold conditions and harder compound tyre to 1395 for higher grip conditions and longer race distances. So just play around in smaller increments for the rear track width. For our cadets, for most of the categories for cadets, it's an 1100 rear track width ruling. But that doesn't mean you can go inside of that. You might go to 1090 or 1095, just a couple of mil in per side. It might just give you a little bit more rear traction and rear stability. Now, obviously, with all these things, you can go into more detail. You can add caster, you can change where your lead ballast is, you can change the rear axle, you can change rims, you can change front and rear ride heights. You can add seat inserts, you can change the stiffness of your seat. There's honestly so many different parameters as to why your kart might be sliding. But in these instances, they're the four most common things as to what you can adjust quickly with your driving style: entry speed, entry line. And from a kart setup point of view, get your tyres in the optimal window, get your rear track width set up pretty consistently, and that should at least mask a lot of that sliding that you might have been feeling. So, that's a pretty quick podcast on why your kart might be sliding. At least this way, if you're on your way to the track and you think, it's cooler conditions and my kid's already out of control, get the driving right first, then let's tweak the setup. Because if the kid's rushing into the corners at 5Ks more speed than what's actually possible, then no matter what you do, axle, rims, tire pressures, no matter what you do, the kid's going to slide. So let's get the driving, let's get the speed, let's hit the line, and then we start to dial in the setup suited to your driving style. I hope this podcast has been quite beneficial for you. Look, if you can pass on this podcast out to more karting families out there, we're trying to help out as many people as we possibly can. And I'm not sure where you're listening to this podcast on, but if you can give it a review or a 5-star rating, obviously it's going to reach more people out there as well. So until next time, guys, I appreciate your feedback on the Kart Class Podcast, and I'll keep trying to help you guys out soon. Cheers.